anyways, I just thought it was a cool name, Lonesome Ace. I always thought a cool name for a band, but it sort of backfired on us because when you introduced us, nobody can say it. It doesn't seem like it's when people ask us, "What's the name of your band?" I have to go like the Lonesome Ace String Band, and it's for some reason that combination of words is sort of clumsy, and nobody ever remembers.
Intersection of good drinks, good music, and good times. This is Hops and Spirits Bar Conversations.
We're heading into the world of maybe Americana, Canadian roots. I don't know. We'll find out exactly what they like to call it that they perform, but it's good music nonetheless. We were joined by two of the trio from Lonesome Ace Stringband. We've got Chris Coole and John Showman. Guys, welcome in.
Hey, Jonathan, how are you?
I'm good. And for those watching, who's who?
Oh, I'm Chris. I'm John. So.
And then the third member who's now joining us is Max Malone. And y'all have a brand new album coming out called Try to Make It Fly, which by the time this drops will be out, even though we're talking before it comes out. So you guys got a lot going on.
Yeah, it's been a busy month. We've been sort of prepping for a bunch of touring that we're doing in the next couple months. We went down to Americana Fest, went out, played Pickin' in the Pines, which is a great festival out in Flagstaff in Arizona. And yeah, we've been sort of getting excited, gearing up for this record. It'll be the first. It's also the first vinyl we've ever had. We just picked up 7 boxes of vinyl records today. They're quite heavy.
So you learn something all the time, right?
Yeah, glad we're doing our first few tours by car, not by foot.
And since this is Bar Conversations, I gotta ask, what are you guys drinking tonight? Anything good?
Yeah, I'm drinking a West Avenue cider. It's it's a good apple cider. It's pretty strong. Made in Ontario.
Nice.
I'm drinking some Highland Park 12-year-old Scotch.
Ooh, I like it. See, I wasn't sure what to go with for y'all. I don't really have anything Canadian, so to speak. So I know you guys like rye up there, so I went with a little Hard Truth rye out of Indiana. It's a sweet mash, so I figured that was fitting for tonight.
I'd meant to go and get more Canadian than this, but then I was been teaching banjo all day and ran out of time, so I went with this. I turned 50 last February, and when I turned 50, I was in the middle of sort of like a bout of sobriety, and so I'd taken like a month off, and then it was like I was enjoying it, so I was like, maybe I'll take the year off, and I ended up taking 3 months off, but nobody knew that was happening, and so everybody gave me whiskey for my birthday, and so I'm still sort of working through these beautiful bottles of whiskey that people gave me on my birthday last year that I wasn't drinking at the time, but I am now.
Yeah, Highland Park's a pretty good one for sure. I've had Highland Park.
I was gonna say that sounds like a good problem to have.
Yes, it is a good problem to have.
Now, John, are you always ciders, or do you mix in the whiskeys and some other spirits as well?
I don't like hard alcohol that much, to be honest. I generally get in trouble with it. I either drink too much too quickly, or and essentially forget what I've done the night before. And there's some stories for sure. And then the other alternative is it just kind of makes me really sick. But the great thing. Okay, the great thing about cider and beer, I like beer too, is that you can still get blackout drunk. You can still do it. I've done it often, and the thing is that I don't feel quite as ill the next day.
One of the great things about me is none of those things he described ever happen to me when I'm drinking hard liquor.
I like it.
So,
'Some people are
I was gonna say my wife gets upset with me because I'll have a few drinks and then the next day I feel fine, and if she did that, she would be not feeling so great all day. So I get some fun stares on that when I'm waking up at 7 in the morning ready to go.
Practice makes perfect.
Hmm. Very true, very true. And you guys have been doing some, I'll call it practice, because you all have been playing music for a few years now, and been playing in different groups along with, the Lonesome Ace band. What's it been like playing part of some of those pretty cool acts up there, whether it was the Foggy Hogtown Boys, Fiverr, and some others?
Yeah, we're lucky. We've had all the members of the band have had a pretty long association. Me and John have been playing together for what about 23 years now or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and pretty much right from the beginning, always in a pretty busy working band. And busy for us hasn't always been touring. We've always done a fair amount of touring, but we had many years where we were doing. Toronto's a great city. I think a lot of folks in the States don't realize what a big city it is. It's, I think, the third or fourth largest city in North America. It's like around the same size as Chicago. So it's always had a great music scene. And especially about 10 years ago, it was a real sweet spot. There's like a lot of what they call residencies now. We always called them house gigs, but where we had ongoing gigs. So we had an ongoing bluegrass gig that was pretty legendary that went for over 20 years. We had a Saturday gig at this place, which is where this trio formed, where it was every Saturday and Sunday, 4 sets each day, and we did that for 10 years or something like that. And there was like many years where we had 3 or 4 gigs a week in town together, just all the time. So we were really lucky to be able to get that many hours in, and a great community. So there a lot of the bands like shared members, or if like if we were touring, there was always people to take your place. So that Wednesday gig we had, there was like the band, the core band, but then there was like a sort of family element to it. So it was always quite often different, especially as the years went on and we tended to be out on the road more. Uh, it was sort of a rotating cast of characters, but it was a really great thing to be a part of, and real special time. And I think the music scene in general in town, but definitely speaking for myself, it was a special, very special time in my life.
One thing I'd like to add to that too is that it was sort of not a, not the most giant pool of people playing the kind of music we were playing, and we kind of all got into bluegrass right around the same time, maybe like 25-ish years ago. I was living in a different town, but I moved to town like in 2000, basically. And, everybody had kind of come to bluegrass, and Chris was always in the scene here in Toronto, and I kind of came in, right at the start of it. And I don't know, there were probably like a dozen people who were really into it, and it kind of started to snowball a bit. And so eventually you had like, you know, probably 20 odd people who were just kind of gigging all the time. And I don't want to minimize how much gigging there actually was. Like at at any given point in time, from probably like 2000 until probably 2012, I'd say both of us never had fewer really than 3 or 4 house gigs every week, and that's for like over 10 years, and we never, and we played maybe half of those together, I would say, and then half of them we would play with the same people, just kind of like a slightly rotating cast. So I mean, we have kind of been in a bunch of different bands, but if you really start to distill it, it's kind of like the same group of musicians who are just kind of like doing slightly different repertoire. Like maybe people would focus on old country hits, and then you'd focus on mostly like traditional bluegrass, or even more kind of Appalachian kind of style folk stuff, and fiddle and banjo tunes, for example. And then there'd be like people shredding it up, like playing instrumental bluegrass and stuff. So there's kind of like there's all these different things that would happen, and people would get kind of shared around a lot. But it really translated to like playing pretty much every single night of the week. like every week of the year. And then when you'd go on tour, it's like suddenly you go on tour for 6 weeks or whatever, and then there's, a vacancy in one of these gigs. So somebody jumps in and fills it. So there's always kind of like, even if you had like a band, like your own little project or whatever, you're going on tour, but you're coming back to town, and you're playing, 3, 4, 5 steady gigs every week, and then picking up other people's gigs. So it's kind of like, it's a cool scene that way. And I think it really, I don't know, it probably mirrors a lot of stuff that's happened in a lot of places, and has been happening in a lot of places in the U.S., like New York or Nashville or whatever. I'm sure it's similar. I don't know. I haven't lived there, but I can imagine that's sort of how musicians get along, right? And kind of get into
Yeah, I was gonna say I talked with the East Nash Grass a while back, and they've got a steady gig. I think it's on a Monday, and any given time it could be a one out of the six that are there, all six, three or four, but usually they've always got a full group, and it's a fun family. And for you two with the instruments you picked up with Chris the banjo, John the fiddle, how did you get into those instruments and kind of fall in love with it, so to speak?
Um, it's for me. I mean, I lived pretty much downtown Toronto my entire life. I was sort of, or within about a 10-minute walk of downtown. Uh, and so I've lived very an urban life my entire life. I've always lived in Toronto. It's the only place I've ever lived. There's no country music whatsoever in my family, really. I mean, you can always go back a generation. My grandfather played a little mandolin and called some square dances, apparently, but I never grew up with the music at all, none of it. And one of the things, I mean, I started playing guitar when I was 13. I always loved music. I got really into the Andy Griffith Show when I was about 12 years old, and which would have been, well, I don't know, what's that, like the mid 80s. And was like, I was always sort of into old stuff and nostalgic, but I got really obsessed with that TV show. And to the point that I had all 249 episodes on VHS tape. Like I was just obsessed. And on that episode, I just like it featured bluegrass. It had the Dillards were on a few episodes, and so were the Kentucky Colonels were on I think 2 episodes. And Andy would sometimes play his guitar. And it wasn't just the music though; it was also like the vibe of the small town southern. I just got really into the sort of romantic element of that whole thing and got swept away by it a little bit. And then that in correlation with the fact that I was learning to play guitar and one day I was always into collecting records and remember being in a record store and seeing this record with this cool sort of cartoon of a bluegrass band and a dude with a banjo and it was in the Grateful Dead scene or Grateful Dead section and it's like Holding in the Way and I mean, that, my life changed from that moment for sure. Uh, and then just pieced it together because at the time there was no internet. This would have been the late 80s. And it was all about going to record stores and you just find a record that, at first it would just look cool. And then I realized I was liking these albums that had the banjo and the fiddle on it. And then I was starting to look for those and look for those instruments and realized it was bluegrass and just it was almost like a little mystery that I put together and eventually I found somebody who taught me some very basic uh, sort of folk banjo and sort of taught myself how to play and was completely obsessed with it from I got my first banjo at 17 and I've yeah that's sort of what I've done ever since for my living. I was a busker for about 12 years through my 20s playing in the subways in Toronto. And yeah, that's my banjo story.
And John on the fiddle?
Yeah, I basically started playing classical music when I was a little kid. I was 6 years old, and I stuck with it. I was really good at it. I went to a big conservatory, actually in the States, in Indiana. I went to Indiana University and had a really good strings program there. So I was there for a bit, and I kind of, I got like technically, I got really good. I played from age 6 to 19, just taking weekly lessons. And yeah, I mean, by the time I was 19, I was pretty good on violin anyway. And I gave it up for dead though. Like I kind of at a certain point, I was like, I don't want to do this. And I was listening to other music. I was listening mostly to like rock and like grunge and stuff. This is like 1990 when I was in university, and I just I gave it up for dead. And then I had a buddy who went to theater school in Montreal, and he played some guitar, and I'd known him a long time. And he's like, "Hey man, we should bust out your violin. We'll just like jam." So we ended up just kind of improvising these, kind of goofy flamenco riffs, like dum 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 da da da. And I just kind of like wail on the violin. It's like, oh, I can still do this. It's been like 3 years since I picked it up, and we sort of started doing this all the time, and then. We eventually he went to school with a bunch of people in theater in Montreal, and he was like, "Hey man, we're doing this this big like just kind of open I don't know what you'd call it. I mean, not really a talent show. It's just like basically him and all the other kids in theater school. And it wasn't like a serious performance. Like come play with me, we'll have fun." So I did that. And met this girl who I thought was really beautiful. I was like, "Oh, this is really amazing." And I was like, "Okay, this is good. I'm sold. I'm digging it now." But then through her, I met a bunch of people who played, folk music. I'd never even heard this stuff before. I met this banjo player called Ram Deckelbaum, an Israeli guy, and he played five finger banjo. I'd never heard anything like it. I'd never really seen a banjo before. I would have been like, 23, and he started introducing me to bluegrass, and he was like, "Can you play bluegrass?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Okay, look, I have all the sheet music." So he showed me all the sheet music of violin. I was like, "Okay, I could sight read." So I started reading all this stuff, and he was like, "Yeah, this is awesome." So he taught me like probably a dozen tunes, and I started playing with him. And then there's a guy called Joey Wright from Toronto that you knew actually. He was one of the first guys I think you played with at that bluegrass jam.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to Montreal, and so I met him independently, and he and Ron and I jammed a bunch. And eventually he convinced me to move to Toronto. And I spent a lot of time in the first 3 or 4 years fiddling. My first 3 or 4 years of playing fiddle music, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how not to sound like a classical violin player. And eventually I started to succeed. So I don't think I sound like a classical player anymore. But at this point, I honestly don't even give a shit. I have a fun time playing. I love playing, bluegrass and Appalachian music mostly, and just like fiddle tunes. And the main attraction for me has always been just playing with other instruments, creating a good groove. And it's something you can't. It's different in classical music. It's not the same, and just the organicness of the music has meant that I never have ever gotten bored with it.
And I was gonna say, is that kind of organically how you three, John and Chris, and then obviously Max, kind of just came together as well? Where I know you had the gig at the Dakota Tavern there for a good while, the residency. When did you guys know that the three of you had a good little thing going on?
Well, as we said, we played in a 5-piece bluegrass band for many years together, all three of us, called the Foggy Hogtown Boys. And I play guitar in that band, although banjo has always been my main instrument. And I would sometimes pull out the banjo in that band, play a few tunes, usually in a set. But we had, like when we'd be on tour, I was sort of always a little bit more into the old time music, but I feel like Max and John started getting more into it in the 2000s as well. And we found that when we were on tour, we would tend to jam. The three of us would tend to jam old time music, and we did a couple. We did a couple gigs, just the three of us, and we dug the vibe, and like most, like honestly, like almost every band I've ever been in, it cropped up from a gig opportunity where that place, the Dakota Tavern, the owner John knew him, and he was opening this new bar, and he wanted to do this, weekly bluegrass brunch, but he couldn't afford the amount of money he was offering. Wouldn't work for a 5-piece band. So we were like, okay, well, let's just do it as a trio. And at first I was playing guitar quite a bit, so it was guitar, bass, and fiddle. But I'd bring banjo out sometimes, and we just found that combination the banjo, fiddle, and bass was really sweet and was fairly unique. And that's sort of how that gig came about. Then it was every Sunday, and then it became every Sunday and Saturday. And then once we'd done that for a few years, we started, we'd get hired for other things and started doing other shows. And then eventually started after probably 7 years, we played. We just did gigs around Toronto, house gigs, and we never recorded anything for 7 years. And I don't think we ever went on the road much before then. We'd all toured lots with other things and Sidemen and all that, but the trio never toured. And then we started going on the road, and it was a very different experience because we were so used to playing in bars. The different vibe to go when you go on the road and you're actually doing a concert. It's different than playing a bar gig, a loud bar gig, and that took a little bit of time to get adjusted to. But once we did, it was great. It's so much easier, to be honest. After years of playing bars, once we got our groove for playing concerts, it was like I would say it's like swinging two bats before you get up to play. It just seems so easy in comparison.
I love that. And how did you guys come up with the name Lonesome Ace? Where does that stem from?
You sort of named the band.
There was a record label called Lonesome Ace Records in the 20s, and Mississippi John Hurt recorded on that label, and so did Doc Boggs. And it's an interesting story. That I can't remember the fellow who owned the label. He at the time yodeling was all the rage because of like Jimmy Rogers and all the blue yodelers, and this guy hated yodeling. So he made a record label called Lonesome Ace Records, and the trademark was without a yodel. And the whole concept of the record label was that he was going to make a record label that had no yodeling on it. Anyways, I just thought it was a cool name, Lonesome Ace. I always thought a cool name for a band, but it sort of backfired on us because when you introduced us, nobody can say it. It doesn't seem like it's. When people ask us, what's the name of your band? I have to go like, the Lonesome Ace Stringband. And it's for some reason that combination of words is sort of clumsy and nobody ever remembers what we're called, and we should probably change the name of the band, but it's sort of too late now.
Does it ever get like misspelled on the marquees as well?
Not so much marquees, but just like people constantly call us like the Lonesome String, or just Lonesome String.
Or the Lonesome Aces.
The Lonesome Aces. Lonesome Aces at least is not entirely wrong.
That sounds like it could be a band name. Lonesome String doesn't sound like much. It's very lacking. It's weak.
It's not. It doesn't augur well. Anyway.
No. Now something that I
esoteric music.
Now, something that does go well is your new album. I've gotten a chance to listen to it. Like I said, hasn't come out yet by the time we're talking, but when this drops, it will be out. It's called "Try to Make It Fly." Where does that title come from? Because I know none of the songs have that as a title. It's not, the title didn't come from a particular song on the album, anything like that. Why that name for the new album?
It's the second last line in the chorus of the first song. That song was written by me and Max, and it sort of tells a story of, just really quickly, the salmon spawn that goes upriver in the spring, and it's pretty amazing because the salmon go like hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, and they're getting weaker all the time. And by the time they get up to their destination, they basically have like a few days left to live. And then they quickly have sex, create spawn like as many new salmon as they can, and then they're just dead. And they basically die. So it's kind of like, I don't know, the metaphor for the song was sort of struggling to, striving through hardship to make something work. And I wouldn't necessarily say that we're striving through hardship so much as we're just like working musicians. But I don't know. It seemed like an apt line to name an album after, and we went back and forth about a lot of different album names. One of the one of our better ones that was sort of tongue in cheek was For Fun and Profit, but we figured maybe try to make it fly was a little more sincere. So um, anyway, yeah. What do you think
Well,
of
I
the
mean,
name?
I like it, and it works well with you talking about how, that struggle. Because am I correct where you also pretty much scrapped all the original recordings from this album and then went back and redid it? So I mean, there was a little bit of work that went into this album.
Yeah, um, we after right before COVID, Max, our bass player, who's not here, he moved from Toronto. We were always a Toronto-based band. He moved from here to the West Coast, and then COVID hit, so we basically didn't see him for 2 years. Um, we were a lot slower opening up here in Canada, for better or worse, um, and and so in 2022, 2022.
Yeah, 2021. So it was,
2021,
like
we got he flew out here. It was the first time we'd been together as a band in 2 years, and we had a writing session. We all had some songs ready, or at least partly ready. We had a writing session, which lasted a week, writing and rehearsal session, and then we came into Toronto, and we went directly into the studio to record. Now, because the songs were so fresh, like so new, and we had a very limited amount of time to record, we decided to take a slightly different approach than what we would generally do. Like our first album was recorded in one day. It's all live. Our next two albums are more or less the same. We've always recorded generally like 90% of the track is recorded live. There might be an overdub. As the albums went on, we tended to do a little bit more overdubbing, but the core of the track was always done live. But in this case, we didn't know the songs as well. We decided to take a different approach, which isn't a bad approach. I definitely think we've all had good results doing this in the past sometimes. But what we did was recorded all the tracks separately and with to a click. We did some stuff together, but it was always to a click, and it was always, we never recorded the vocals live because we didn't know the songs well enough yet. We overdubbed the vocals and everything, and again, you can get really good results doing that. But we're a band that has played together. We've played thousands of shows together. We've played live. We know how to play live really well together. And when we listen back to the record, although it was obviously it was perfect because anyone can sort of make an album with that process and make it fairly perfect if you have time and a certain amount of skill. It was missing the best part of our band. It was missing just the spark, and it's like it just seemed a shame. I mean, because as I say, sort of anyone can do the other, but not anyone can. Not any band has the years. That's that's sort of a rare thing these days for a band to have the deep years of performance together. So we just decided it wasn't good enough, and we toured all last year, then 2022, and we played those songs live. We wrote a couple more new tunes, and by the time we went into the studio in the fall of 22, we again recorded the core of the tracks live and sang live for the most part, and we were much happier with the results. So, yeah.
I was gonna say it turned out really well from what I've gotten to listen to, and I feel like you have a nice variety on this one. Whether that's you got some instrumentals, which I know is kind of like that core jam sessions, the Appalachian, so to speak, and then you've also got one of my favorites, Smoke on the Shoulder, You got sweeter sound, all sort of a little bit of a different feel. Was that kind of on purpose to kind of show a little bit of everything since this was all original from y'all?
Hard to answer. I mean, I don't think we necessarily set out to make anything sound different. I think what we were trying to do was basically bring as many of our own influences into the music as we could, just because we were writing original music, and I think when you're writing original music, you want to write something that feels real and true to you, right? So because there's three of us, and it's we did write some of the stuff together for sure, like we arranged it all together, but each of us individually is also kind of bringing song ideas to the table. Um, I just think it ends up sounding a little bit like all the different things that influence us individually as musicians, and I think going back, it would if I could imagine, what would be the perfect original record, I'd say maybe they'd sound a little bit more the same, so they would have like maybe more in common from track to track. In a way, that sort of made sequencing the music in some ways a little tricky, because you're trying to make it have sort of a flow, when really, like, say Smoke on the Shoulder and You'll Be There don't have very much in common. Like You'll Be There's kind of got like a real more sort of fiddle and banjo kind of vibe, where Smoke on the Shoulder is like, the first thing we recorded on it was like this basically late 60s drum loop, and we used it because so here's a good example of how things happen in the studio. We recorded the song a couple times, and it wasn't quite feeling really in the pocket, and the engineer was like, hey, look, man, why don't I just, like, I know you guys don't want to record to a click track, which we didn't. He's like, look, why don't I just put like an easy silly drum groove down and see what it sounds like when you play to that. And we started playing, and it was like, oh, this actually sounds great. And so we got him to kind of like, with our help, like pick sort of the right sounds for just the simplest backing track you can imagine, and then just played to that. And I mean, we played live to it, but it has like a certain vibe. But that's very different from just like the three of us kind of saying, okay, like go, and hitting like fiddle, banjo, and bass. So in that sense, it was like, okay, how do we get these sort of disparate elements to blend on a record? And I don't know, it's tricky. And like I said, I think if maybe if we make another 3 or 4 records, hopefully eventually we'll make a record where it's like, oh yeah, everything sort of sounds the same, but it's sort of different. But maybe that's not.
Hey,
I don't know.
I thought it was great.
I mean, we're happy with it. We even left a song that we really liked off the album because it was just too out there sounding compared to everything else. So, which we'll probably release as a single at some point. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. The albums just happen the way they're going to happen. I mean, I really love albums that, like, two of my favorite albums of all time are, probably one of my favorite album of all time is the Redheaded Stranger, Willie, but then also the John Wesley Harding, the Dylan album, and both those albums are like, the sound and the vibe is so similar from end to end. I love those types of albums, but I mean,
that's not what we made here.
It's not what we made here. And I feel like that's the type of thing that it's easier to do if it's one. We have 3 writers and 3 singers and a bunch of different genres sort of coming in. So it's just bound to sort of be a little bit more all over the place.
Another thing to add at this point too is that this is the 6th record that we've made just in this trio, and of those 6 records, 3 of them were pretty much just straight up Appalachian music, and those hang together extremely well. Like, they're very, very similar. So I think in a way also, we were going to just write an all original album. We did make one album that was mostly original before, and it's sort of the same thing. Like, the sounds are a lot more disparate between the original tracks than they would be if we were just playing a bunch of Appalachian stuff. So it's and also as a band when you evolve, it's like, well, we have this one sound, so let's see how many other sounds we can kind of develop. And I think eventually you're going to make stuff that just sounds a lot different, and you can hear that in lots of kinds of music too. Like a lot of bluegrass bands too, as they get older, will start or older as they make more music, they start to they start to sound their sound will change, and obviously like pop bands and rock bands, and hip hop bands, whatever. I mean, sounds change, and yeah, I feel like there's sort of a point where things all sound very consistent, and then a point where they really kind of widen out. So I don't know if we're moving one way or the other, but this record is definitely one where he kind of threw everything at the wall and took everything that stuck, and most of it stuck. So.
Except for that one song, but
Yeah.
I do you make a good point though. All three of you do write, all three of you do sing on records. So how is it balancing, three different, obviously probably three different writing styles, three different everything, and kind of but still making it your own and kind of making it who you guys are.
We there definitely isn't a thing like it's like we each get three songs or anything. There's certainly none of that. Um, we do contribute like on this album. We share the songwriting credits equally on all the tunes. Now you can sort of tell who wrote the tune by who's singing lead on it usually. But when I say wrote the tune, wrote the main body of the tune. But like me and John definitely contributed to like all the tunes I wrote on this by we just worked together on them, changing ideas on the chorus, changing some chord things possibly. I tend to not be like I'm pretty precious about the words aspect. I don't really like not that I wouldn't take a suggestion, but that part of it to me is a little like that I'm gonna bring the words and the melody, but I'm always open, right? And I try to be more and more open to other people's ideas for arrangements and chords and things like that. So it doesn't feel like any one person is sort of like the main thing. And because we've also played together so much, I mean we're on the same page generally. It's not like there isn't like a awkward moment where somebody brings something and it's like feels like totally inappropriate. It's generally
Or if it is, we can tell like within about one or two times trying the song. It's like maybe we won't do that right now.
yeah.
But it's like yeah. We generally come to consensus pretty quickly.
I like that, and you guys have aged like a fine Scotch. You got a few years under yourselves, like you said, and have been able to do some cool stuff. Um, you mentioned you played in a lot of bars, things like that. Now you're getting to do tours. What's the best part about just getting out there and being able to perform and share these songs with folks and kind of show them what you got?
I like the aspect of traveling. I just like traveling simply, and going to a place where you've never been and playing for playing for other people and everybody's happy. And then seeing how they live, trying new food. I mean, I like simple stuff like that. I feel like in terms of actually performing, I don't actually really care where it is as long as people are people are receptive and into it. And I generally find that I only really like a listening crowd if they're sincere about listening. Like sometimes you play sometimes there'll be a vibe where you're playing and it's like people are expected to be quiet, and that can be sort of oppressive. Like in that case, I'd just rather play a loud bar. And but to me, one of the most satisfying things also is if you play a loud bar, and as you're playing and they're drinking, they actually get quieter and start paying attention. Then you know you're doing something right. If you can get a bunch of drunk people to listen to you as they get more drunk, kudos, man. That's then you know you're on to something. It doesn't really pay, but it makes you feel good.
One of one of my favorite things, and we've I think all of our favorite things. You know, we've been at this a long time, and we're not like it's. We're really lucky to be able to do this for our living, and we have great fans and everything. But we haven't like, we haven't like, hit any sort of big time, and it's not that glamorous. And we have still have like some pretty shitty gigs sometimes when we're out there on the road. But one of the things that I take the most pride in and sort of get a real kick out of is, sometimes you show up somewhere and I remember we played this Legion up in northern Alberta a couple years ago tour, and we show up at the Sunday night and there's just like nobody there, and it's like really, really lame and potentially depressing. But we always have a thing that sort of the worse the gig is, the better we play. Like we make a point of it. It's like, okay, if there's 7 people come out and see us play, we're going to put a show on that like there's 500 people here, and those 7 people are going to go home and tell their friends, they're like, holy shit, man, we saw a band the other night at the Legion. They were like, they were from all the way across the country, and it was Sunday night, and there was like 6 people there. Those guys played the best show I've seen, in years. That's what I want to have happen, and I take a lot of pride in when we can pull that and not get down and just just put on the best show. We're always putting on our best show possible, but I feel like when you can put on a really good show in a potentially depressing situation, you at least have a few years left in you.
Yeah, and it's also like the thing is that that's how you actually get better too, because we can go back literally to that place in northern Alberta now. And the last time
There'll be 12.
no, yeah, 12 people, it's not 7. No, we played it. We played a couple of gigs around that area in their last tour. They were great. I mean, it was a lot more than 12 people there. It was really good. And I just feel like that's kind of how you build. You build character as a band, but you also kind of build your reputation. Because then people just know you're serious. It's like, yeah, these guys are going to play good. It's a given. And once it's a given, then you're doing something right.
And especially if they're drunk and they're paying attention. Is there a favorite song that y'all love to play, whether it's yours or someone else's, that you just when you get the chance, it's just one of the pleasures for you?
Well, we like there's a one song we play, like, because again, like our main gig that we played for so many years was this brunch gig, and it was like it was like a really popular gig, and all these hipsters would bring their kids there, and it was like loud as hell. It was people talking and kids dancing and screaming and people getting drunk and partying, and it was a really wild gig. And and we were often there was definitely mornings where we'd show up. We'd start at 10, I think, and we'd be in rough shape and sometimes still sort of shining a bit from the evening before. And one song we loved to play is "Keep Your Skillet Good and Greasy" by Uncle Dave Macon. We would play just these weird extended funk version of that song and stare out at the audience, and it was just great. We had some great times, just barely holding on and playing that song. That's, for me, that's a song I definitely remember.
Oh man, I feel like the thing now is we've been playing so long. And we have such a big repertoire that if we play a 2-hour show, like we can stack that show with songs that we love every single song. It's like, and that's so getting back to like playing, whether you're playing for 500 people or thousands of people at a festival or a tiny crowd in in the middle of like northern Alberta. It's when the set list is like, oh yeah, this is an awesome song. Oh, that's an awesome song too. Oh, cool, I love this song. It's like, oh, wicked. Now we're playing this one. You just kind of have, in your own mind, it's like hit after hit after hit. It's pretty easy to stay motivated. So I kind of like it all. Like I'll always find something that's really great to play, and we sing something that makes me happy. I think that's the main thing. If you're having fun when you're playing, and I mean, you have to be serious and professional, but your joy while you're playing, joy is what translates to people who are listening. Just a second.
I was gonna say you
One
I was gonna say you've made some good music for sure, and obviously you got the album drop. And what else can folks expect from you the rest of this year and into 2024?
More touring. We'll be out in the northeast or northwest. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, Washington State, Oregon, and up in Vancouver in the end of November, and just more touring. Me and John play as a duo fairly often as well, and we'll be down in Nashville and North Carolina at the end of January, and just more hitting the road, and then just hopefully more creative projects. We don't have, we're just getting through this album cycle, and it's crazy because with the way these days you release singles. We released 5 singles for this album, so I feel like we've literally been releasing this album since last May, and every single is like you're doing press releases for the single and like pitching the single and videos for the single. So I feel like we've been releasing this album, and we literally have for half the year. And not that I'm sick of releasing it, but I haven't had time to think about what's next for the band, to be honest with you. What's next is finally having this album out, and then hopefully people hearing it and hopefully people liking it, and get some good gigs and do it all again.
Well, also it helps to know we've got 30 shows to play in the next little while, so we're gonna have a nice little chunk of touring, mostly sort of eastern U.S., sort of through the sort of northern part of the states to Wisconsin, and then we're going.
You just told me.
Oh, yep. Sorry, missed. Okay. Yeah. I was busy.
You got slightly distracted.
My dog, it's like balancing family life and talking about music.
I totally get it. I forget who I think maybe it was the Boomtown Saints, and my daughter who's about to turn 5 just had to always ask me questions that night. So I totally get the family responsibilities sometimes popping up on the podcast. And for those that maybe haven't heard you guys and after listening are interested, what would you say to them on to expect on the music that you've released and the album that you guys have put out?
What I would just tell them to go and listen to it. It's on all the streaming services. You can get it on our off our website if you still like to download. If you still have figured out a way to download MP3s and get them on a device and listen to them, congratulations. We've got you covered. We also have actual CDs. If you still own a CD player, you can order that. And we also, for this album, have the vinyl, which won't be available through mail, but will be available at live shows.
It'll be at live shows unless we have too many flying dates, in which case we'll probably have got enough room for 10 of them in our suitcase. Yeah, look at that.
Well,
it's got 2 sides.
And as you guys said, you found out they weigh more than you expected.
Yeah, it's I don't think they're 180 gram vinyl, but the ratio of vinyl weight to CD weight is not favorable.
Well, I like it. Well, John, Chris, this has been a lot of fun. Folks, if you get the chance, I highly recommend the album. It's a fun one, and I think there's something on there for everyone. And thank you, guys.
Thanks very much for talking to us, Jonathan.
Appreciate it.
Find more from Hops and Spirits at hopspirits.com.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.